Rabbi Berg, Bethon Board of Trustees, distinguished guests, and the class of 2023. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Okay, this isn't really a commencement address, but it is graduation Shabbat, and we have some spectacular seniors at Bethon. I was honored to get to write a number of letters of recommendation for these seniors for college applications and summer jobs. And I should mention others graduating in this season as well, from law school, from medical school, PA school. There's even some pre-K graduates here that I'm really excited are graduating, and they're going to join Jewish Discovery Lab next year. This month of June is a time of transition. It's a time of change. If you were in high school during these last 4 years, you've experienced significant change. You studied through a global pandemic when so much changed about how we gather and what we understand and misunderstand about our responsibility to keep each other safe. You encountered and confronted the presidency of Donald Trump and a new prime minister term for Benjamin Netanyahu. You've seen civil rights that we thought were part of the progress of the countries we love rapidly being eroded. And you finished high school during the popularization of ChatGPT and a whole host of AI products that promise to change the way that we work and live in an unimaginable number of ways. And this last change, it might be the most transformational for those of you who are about to enter college. For so long, many high school graduates were advised, go to college and become a knowledge worker, because then you'll have a job that could never, ever be replaced by a machine. And while I think higher education is incredibly valuable for lots of reasons, AI is forcing us to ask questions about these core assumptions that we previously made about the world. Could a machine be a computer coder? Could it write a hard-hitting news article or diagnose your medical issue? Could it argue on your behalf in court? Or, God forbid, could a computer give pastoral care? These are questions that we weren't looking for, but they've been thrust upon us in a lot of ways. Questions of this size mean that a lot is about to change. And change is always difficult, even if it doesn't come in artificially intelligent-sized proportions. I remember when I started college, a guidance counselor suggested that the 3 most stressful transitions in life are starting a new job, entering a new relationship, and moving. And then she explained that entering college was, in essence, engaging in all 3 of these most stressful transitions all at the same time. When we make transitions like this, we are willingly and sometimes unwillingly writing a new story about ourselves. We're thrusting ourselves away from what is familiar and into an unknown. Sure, there are a lot of opportunity and excitement in this process, but maybe there's also some anxiety, some fear, and some discomfort. It's a strange time to enter college because, in many ways, the purpose of education is shifting to meet this moment. You could learn a sophisticated skill set of engineering, design, medicine, robotics, but entering any field in 2023, you can bet that the skills you learn now will pretty quickly become obsolete. You'll have to keep learning. You'll have to keep growing. So here is my rabbinic advice to the graduating seniors, and maybe a little bit for the rest of us as well. Whatever you choose to major in college, whatever any of us choose to focus our time on in the next number of years, as we continue to rewrite the stories of our own lives, make sure you major in change. Make sure that whatever set of skills or knowledge you seek to acquire, you spend time learning how to understand yourself and your environment as it changes and transforms around you. And learn how to adapt in the face of uncomfortable change, maybe even radical change. Learning how to embrace this kind of change, it's not so new. It's not really just advice for the age of AI. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus wrote famously in the 6th century, before the Common Era, that life is flux. No person ever steps in the same river twice. For it's not the same river, and it's not the same person. So maybe it's cold comfort to say that even 2,500 years ago, the ancient Greeks also felt that their lives and their world was moving too fast to make sense of pretty much anything. But Heraclitus's formation is important because he acknowledges that it's the river and the person who are changing. We're not passive, detached people seeing changes in the world parade before us. We change as well. As a folk song by one of my teachers, Rabbi Shoshana Friedman goes, "The tide is rising, but so are we." So, high school graduates, what might it look like to major in change? What would it take to build the resiliency and curiosity needed to continuously step into a different river as a different person? To find this answer, I'm really inspired by our rabbinic tradition. Rabbi B'nai Lappi, founder of Savara, the radically queer yeshiva, teaches that every culture and every religion tells itself a master story. And no matter how deeply rooted into the community that story is, one day it will eventually crash. And these stories crash for a number of reasons. Perhaps you find a story you like a little bit better, that explains your world in a more holistic way. Or perhaps an event has happened in the world that makes your story no longer workable, no longer true. Or maybe, perhaps, you've changed, and the way you interact with your story has changed as well. And when your story crashes, Rabbi Lappi says you have 3 options. 1, you can deny the crash ever happened, build a really high and tall fence around your master story. 2, you can throw out your story entirely and start from scratch. Or 3, you rework your story, holding on to what works, adopting new traditions along with the old, basically revising your master story so that it works for your own time. And Rabbi Lappi explains that this 3rd option is the option that the early rabbis took. They understood that when the temple was destroyed, there was no way to hold on to the cult of worship that they had known before. And according to their master story, the Torah, without animal sacrifices, there were not many options available to praise God. They had to decide what they were going to do. Would they build a fence around this story and try to go on as normal? Or would they give up on their Judaism entirely? Seems like they weren't willing to do either of those. They found a new way to move forward. Recognizing that both they and their river had changed, they prepared to step in anew. And they created a Judaism that held fast to its biblical roots while adapting to the realities of their own time. And we can see so many examples of their work. We can see an example of their work in their very first Mishnah. It goes like this. The rabbis ask, from what time at night does one recite the Shema in the evening? And they answer, from the time when the priests entered to partake of their evening sacrifice. I love this Mishnah for its clarity, for its inventiveness, and for the pain that lurks under the surface. The rabbis know from the Torah that they're instructed to say the words of the Shema in the morning and in the evening, but the problem is they don't exactly know what time evening is. So instead of setting a time based on the moon or the end of the workday or some other metric, they set a time in line within their sacrificial system. Only one issue is that the temple had been destroyed. The Israelites were no longer making animal sacrifices. So the Mishnah connects a new form of worship to an old master story. The rabbis are not yet ready to give up on their story of sacrifices, and yet they know that the master story that they were told and that they were telling was no longer tenable. The river had continued to flow. So what did they do? They instituted a new form of worship, words and prayers replacing doves and goats, and yet they maintained the old tradition by weaving their new story within their old. And they do this in a number of ways, coordinating the number of prayer services in a day to the number of animal sacrifices that would have been offered in their old system. And when Jews pray, they still face the temple, despite it no longer serving as a central pilgrimage location for animal sacrifices. In their new story, God's presence still dwells in that place. I imagine that in the next 4 years, especially if you're going to college, but probably for all of us, there will be times when we question the master story of our own lives. Those of you who are going to college, I assume this will happen to you a lot. You'll walk into a river and you just won't recognize the currents. And I hope that in these moments, you won't be afraid. You'll remember that change can be good. That life is flux. That you have the power of our tradition and the power within yourselves to change without losing the thread of who you truly are. This week's Parsha, it's about change as well. The Israelites wandering through the desert do what many people do in the face of change. They complain. Despite God's gift of manna falling from the sky to provide sustenance for the community, the Israelites complain. If only we had meat to eat, they say. We remember the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. Now our gullets are shriveled. There's nothing at all, nothing but this manna to look to. This is the promise, and this is the warning about change. Sometimes when encountering change, it's easy to romanticize what once was. When God is raining manna from the sky, the change itself may make you long for cucumbers and slavery. And in these moments, I hope you'll also stay the course. Find common cause with others who are also going through these changes. Always remember those who are most vulnerable and most needy during times of change. I think it's time for all of us to major in change. It's really the only skill that I'm certain will not be automated. Shabbat shalom.